then 5 games. So I wanted to, wanted to get started. Basically, in the lesson is how to beat a double fianchetto opening. And it's a good question. Double fianchetto openings aren't actually that common. If your opponent plays a double fianchetto opening, they're probably foregoing some of their, more, I don't know, more promising opportunities in the center. So the interesting thing about fianchetto opening, d4, d5, say c4, c6, g3, and basically you're in very well explored territory, especially in queen's pawn games. They tend to be a thing where basically you have queen pawn opening, so g6. This is an opportunity for white to get a quick. Hey, R Paradox, welcome to the stream. Thanks for being here. So basically, I was just sort of looking through here and seeing, your general patterns for double fianchettoed openings. This would be one of them. This is fairly common play. Double fianchetto openings tend to happen the most frequently in the queen's pawn games, and this would be one of them. This is the Slav defense basically. It's the full c6 e5 or c6 d5 Slav. Interesting stuff. What are the characteristics of this opening that are kind of the most prominent? I guess what I would say here is white's going to have opportunities in the late middle game. Black won't have much of an opportunity to clear off these bishops. That's another thing about a fianchettoed bishop on b2 or g2 is they tend to be fairly inaccessible. So like in this game, here basically black has equalized in the center, and white has the choice of whether to play. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. You're saying double fianchettos without pushing a pawn to the center. No, I actually think that's pretty reasonable. That type of thing can happen in the modern, which we'll take a look at next. But I just wanted to show kind of what a queen's pawn position looks like. In this eval, white has a good, white has a positive eval here. So I would definitely recommend in general, if you're interested in playing a double fianchettoed game, I would go probably for a out of a queen's pawn game where there is some sort of level of center control. If we're going the other direction, we can take it back to the start. If we're interested in looking at how to beat basically doubled queen's pawn openings here, we can take a look at it in the modern. If this is a more common structure for white to be seeing, then that's definitely something that we can work with too. In these types of positions, I think the best chances are going to be something along the lines of attacking on the king side. Having this kind of double fianchetto structure is not particularly good for black. If you neglect the center development, you're giving your opponent center control and a spatial advantage. It'll have the normal kind of problems of the modern opening or a flank opening versus the big center openings. Basically, black's losing by 1.2 pawns here, and white hasn't really done too much. You can do c pawn potentially. Let's see in this position. So here, after bishop to g7, c4 is the third most popular move. Modern defense with c4 is not too uncommon. You can come up with c4, f4, but my main argument here is that you basically are voluntarily giving up an advantage as black. I mean, black, you're just not challenging you're basically just not challenging the center. These are attacks, and there will be attacks here, but for most practical purposes, these bishops are going to be fairly unused for a good percentage of the game. You will have opportunities like right now this e4 pawn is pinned by the knight, or the knight is pinned to the defense of this e4 pawn. But in terms of realistic things to happen, I just don't think these these modern defenses are particularly scary. The things to do as white here, which is sort of the purpose of what I was going over, is like what are white's plans in this situation. I think it's similar to a modern opening, really. It's similar to modern King's Indian Defense perk, where basically what you're doing is you're trying to establish a big center, and using your big center, come up with healthy places to develop your pieces so that you can attack. Black has voluntarily given you an advantage, so you want to continue to hold that advantage and use it to basically beat your opponent. So here, say queen d2, knight c6, d5, knight e5, and on knight e5 here, knight takes, d takes, bishop to d3. Basically, white's looking pretty good. I mean, white's up a pawn, 1.6 pawns, looks solid. Black has ideas, but this pawn structure in particular is actually very solid, and it provides white with a huge spatial advantage. In going through this, e4 to g5, d4 to bishop g7, white's got almost a pawn up here. This should be fine. Knight to c3 holds all the pawns together, and really it's just about coming up with quick and efficient development for white while black remains underdeveloped. These bishops just aren't that useful, you're sort of, they may come into play to support like a c5 pawn break here, but I'm not sure that this was worth spending black's first 4 moves on. Black is going to have a lasting spatial disadvantage and probably the ability to get attacked, on the king side by white. Let's just look at like the main, one of the main lines here. Bishop to d3, knight d7. I'm just going to pull off of the, basically pull off of the main lines. White just forms this very like solid center. Black could probably play c5. This, by the way, is the hippopotamus position as black. E6 and d6, knight e7, knight d7, and the bishops. So yeah, the hippopotamus position has, some playability, but it's just not something that challenges white in any way. So white needs to come up with a way to, to advance his attack. This center is solid, but he's going to need to continue with something reasonably good, but also not overextend. Here I would say that white continues to advance. This b4 pawn move is mainline theory. Basically white's just seizing more and more of a spatial advantage. The thing about these double fianchetto opening is that there's black does, yes. So black is the one who needs to find the advantageous pawn break. White, so in double fianchetto openings, like in modern strategy, basically the main point for white is to basically come up with an attack that utilizes his center control and space advantage to turn into like a functional attack. Black's idea is to undermine white's center, particularly if white's center gets overextended. Black needs an advantageous pawn break. White needs to form an attack using his developmental and spatial advantages. That's the main strategy here. Let's just go through the lines. Let's take a look at what a sample game for this looks like. This is a high-level game. This is a master game in the opening theory. But here, black is overextending, I think, on the, on the king side. Queen c2, knight takes e3, f takes e3, knight f6. I mean, white's going to have this lasting, white still has an enormous spatial advantage here and almost a 1-pawn advantage. Against these double fianchettoed bishops, I mean, they're not, these bishops have very limited mobility at this point. This hasn't really paid off as a general idea for black. There's been no problems. He's held on to the bishops, but I don't think there's much good about this position for black. White can play bishop to e6. White can play knight h2, knight g4. But overall, I think white's got a big spatial advantage here. There's just not much of a reason for black to do this. One fianchetto is worth it. I mean, the modern defense is fine. It uses, the modern defense and these the issue with these fianchettoed bishops, right, is that you're making no play for the center. You have the long diagonal and you have the single point of attack in the center, but it doesn't really, it doesn't really hold particularly well. White can just play moves like, e5, which, isn't playable here, but is basically like something that blocks off this bishop fianchetto. These bishops can be made very useless in the, on their fianchettoed positions. That's not really something to get intimidated by. In terms of beating these games, what it's going to take is tactical resourcefulness and the ability to execute a complete attack. In the modern openings, in flank openings, like double fianchettoed included, black usually castles kingside, and then you can just play h4, h5 attacks, and you have to execute well tactically to make that work. But you don't. But your idea there is basically not to. But your idea in doing this is to not get too disrupted on the. I mean, basically, h4, g4, h5, needs to be executed well. It needs to be taken as a complete attack from front to back. But basically, that's the way that one beats these doubled fianchettoed openings, and in general, all flank openings. There's a big similarity between the modern with one fianchetto and this and this specific modern line with two fianchettos. White's going to get a huge center, full center control, full spatial control, and black's not going to be able to do much there. So I don't know. White seizes more center control. I'm not sure b4 was the most promising thing for white. More developing moves like rook e1 or rook d1 might be better. But yeah, I mean, white should basically, try to maintain control of the center without overextending, and then in this position, start to look at how to launch an attack. Ideas like h4 here, I think, are good. Knight to h2, g3, h4, I think is a good idea. But yeah, f5, e takes, knight takes, queen c2, knight takes. White's in good place. There's not really much in the way of direct attack, but I think white can advance his position with knight to h2, knight to g4, bishop to f5, e4. This looks good. But anyways, this is solid for white. A good idea, I think. Basically this is best. These are masters on both sides of this game. So I guess what I would say here is look at, like, ideas, basically attacking ideas here seem like a good play. Anyways, very interesting situation. I would probably keep trying to push things here, but overall, that's how one beats these types of attacks. Anyways, double knights on the center pawns is a good idea. And white's looking fine. This is the general strategy. I don't know. Maybe a castling queenside would have been a better idea. So let's take a look at the bishop e3, e6, queen d2, h6, and then queenside castling line. This idea might be a little bit better. This will give a more effective ability to pawn storm as white. But yeah, the main theme is the same. It's a very complex question how to beat doubled fianchettoed bishops. But the answer is play it as if it was a normal modern situation. Develop quickly, take control of the center, don't overextend with moves like e5 or d5 prematurely, and get your pieces in a position to attack. That's my argument. So yeah, definitely continue on with that, and you should be able to launch strong attacks against doubled fianchettoed bishops. It's not really a structure that's played that frequently in master level chess, but it's nothing to be intimidated by at any level. It's just not a very efficient opening. It doesn't provide the center control that a good opening is supposed to provide. Anyways, interesting topic. It was totally it was actually really interesting looking at a few fianchettoed bishop games. Fianchettoed bishops just don't happen that often. You can find I would definitely launch an attack. Launch an attack on whatever side the king castles on. It's almost always king side. But yeah, that's my I don't know. That's my argument there. All right, so d4 is an early way. So okay, so you're playing the Smith-Morra Gambit. So let's take a look at the eval in the Smith-Morra Gambit. So queen takes, knight f3, knight to c6. Yeah, Smith-Morra Gambit is, I don't know, I would say interesting. I think with c3 and then e5 or d takes c3, black is equalized. But if it's fun for you to play, then by all means go ahead. I'll just skip through the opening. Okay, so here you're looking about equal. I think bishop takes c3 was better than bishop b takes c3 was better than or bishop takes c3 was better than b takes c3 here. But anyways, white's looking fine. Bishop takes here, and I think everything's good. Black can play e4, potentially knight e5, but overall here, white still maintains the advantage. After b takes and e4, this knight's going to get displaced. Ideas for knight g1, knight f6. Yeah, I mean, that's right. Basically, it'll make the file for attack be rook to c1, rook to c1 facing rook to c8. So I would say, yeah, knight to g5, sure. And overall, I think white's just looking fine. I don't know. White's got about a 0.3 advantage here. I don't know. A6, castles. White's doing fine. So yeah, I guess what I would say here is, just play white's position normally, and you did a good job consolidating your pawn structure here on the queen side. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the theory for this Smith-Morra gambit particularly well. It's kind of... Hey, welcome, Electric Horse. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, here, a6, castles, rook to c8, f3, and white's going to end up in a pretty good situation here. This looks good. I think I would try here, I don't know, maybe rook f e8 could be good. But I don't know. White has the better bishop pair. White has the better pawn structure. White has a connected passed pawn on the d file, although that's going to be hard to promote. Position looks good. Cool. Interesting. So black won on time, but I guess what I would say is bishop takes a6, sure, rook to b8, and overall white's looking fine. These pawns are, going to be a liability. This pawn is much stronger, but I don't know. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, the Smith-Morra gambit, not opening I'm super familiar with, but by this point you're actually okay as white. B takes c3 is much better, has a much better eval. In terms of opening theory, there's bishop takes c3 was played 368 times. Bishop takes c3 is the correct move here. So if you go to bishop takes c3, this is in the opening book. This is the only move. So playing b takes c3, as happened in the game, is going to provide a lot less opening theory material. Knight takes, and now white has the two minor pieces and an advantage here. So, ideas. I guess I would say here rook to f4 could be good for white. What? Yeah. No. We jump back to this position, our paradox. So what's the question? Bar went from -3 when he offered the queen trade. Sure. Yeah, let's take a look. So it looks like it's about equal. Yeah, so it looks like there's a tactical issue here. So I would say, there's a tactic here. So h6, and then this knight is forced to go back to h3, and then bishop takes h3. So this just overall, and then e3. So this is a this was a sizable tactical oversight for white. I don't know. I guess I would say rook to g1 potentially, but it's sort of up to you. Yeah, no. I mean, I think the issue is that it's so. The issue is here. I'm not so focused on like the tactical consequence. I'm focused more on kind of the opening issue here. Bishop takes c3 was played in 368 games. If I feel like in the Smith Mora, if you're playing a game that's as difficult to play as the Smith Mora, these are the types of theory moves where it's really important to get things right. Your margin for error in an opening like the Smith Mora is much lower than your normal situation. So here you play b takes c3, and then black has a few options. But on b takes c3, it is not a question that it's bishop takes as opposed to b takes. So I think that's a good takeaway in terms of, if you're going to keep playing the Smith Mora, this is a necessary move to understand. That's my feeling on this one. E4, knight e5, knight takes, d takes, knight e7. And then white has a few options here. Queen a4 is fine, but as opposed to the previous one, now white has some choices. Let's think about the long-term pieces of this game. You have the better minor piece. You actually have equal material, which is kind of important. This pawn on e5 is not super easily attacked by black. Black can, the only pieces that can, this bishop can never attack this pawn on e5. So white's position here isn't too terrible. I guess I would say here, moves like queen takes d5, bishop to b5 could be good. But it's really up to white. Bishop e2, queen a4, queen e2, they're all fine. I guess, if I was to look at this position, the plans that make the most sense to me are ones that sort of revolve around attacking on e4. I would try what I could to attack the pawn on e4, probably after trading off the knight. So let's say the plan that I'm thinking of is like, well, actually, or you could keep the knight on. So queen a4, bishop d7, queen a3, queen e6, rook d1, castles. And now you have multiple opportunities to kind of maneuver at this pawn on e4. You also have bishop to b4, which is kind of interesting. But let's say rook to d6. So rook to d6, I think, puts the most immediate pressure on black. Here, queen f5, and then like bishop e2, bishop c6, queen c5. But we're in a sideline is the most important thing. This is with bishop takes c3. I'm sort of just going through this in order to demonstrate that bishop takes c is bishop takes c3 is the important theory line in this opening. So I don't know. If you feel like you're getting good positions out of b takes c3, then again, feel free to play it. But there's about a 1 point difference between bishop takes c3 and pawn takes c3 here. So I'd strongly recommend bishop takes c3 as opposed to pawn takes c3. Anyways, I would just keep basically just keep going. Ideas like c4, ideas like d5, bishop e3, all of these things I think are fairly good for white. Black hasn't really made much of a successful opportunity to challenge your center control. Now you have an isolated pawn in the center, and you can just sort of push the pieces around it. Rook f4 is good. I don't know, bishop to c4. But yeah, I guess I would just keep playing as white and try to maximize. These two bishops are good. Maybe g4 could be good. But I don't know. In terms of establishing like a medium-term plan, I think I would make sure that your pieces are really well positioned and then start to try to move the d pawn forward. I think a lot of your winning chances in this game are going to come from this d pawn. Your opponent may make an error that makes your life easier, and you'll be able to come up with the piece or pawn win. But the best, most stable win to win by force in this situation, this middle game situation, is d5. So yeah, all right, you played it immediately. That's probably fine. And here, interesting. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, BFG. Appreciate it. So yeah, so black, black basically loses the situation, or black basically, or white loses control of the situation, and black gets too active. This was a big blunder. Letting this king onto d5 was very valuable for black. Bishop b3 doesn't seem to change the situation much. I guess longer term you're looking at playing bishop to b3 to bishop to d1, but I think you gotta keep black out of the situation. There's a big premium to space control in the in white openings, but yeah, I think king to d4, keeping out king on e5 is very important. So yeah, interesting. By this point, I think black is getting close to winning, but the d pawn was the important one. So let's go back front to back, and try to establish where the errors are. First, Smith-Morra equalizes for black, but if you want to play it, the opening theory line after bishop takes c3 is b takes c3. So bishop takes c3 here. This fianchettos the bishop. It effectively defends this, and it keeps these two pawns from getting, it improves the pawn structure relative to b takes c3. After b takes c3, you may have connected pawns in the middle, but this always keeps your pawns contiguous. King to d4. No, because the bishop is defending the d5 pawn. I'll show you. We'll get back to it in a second. But the first thing is the opening theory line is bishop takes c3 here, not b takes c3. I think this is pretty important. There's about a pawn difference between the first best and second best moves here, and in 368 master games, it's bishop takes c3. So I think it's pretty important to get this theory right in a gambit. In a gambit, you just don't have that much margin for error. Knight takes, d takes, knight e7, and then white has a bunch of choices at this point. Plans I think involve, I think good plans involve trying to win the e4 pawn, but it's up to you. Okay, the rook's getting involved. Rook d6, queen f5. This all looks reasonable. In terms of looking at this game, I don't think there's much. I think it's a game basically. Plans, I like the idea of winning this e4 pawn. Here, this isn't the long-term strategy of the game, but I think you might be able to launch an attack. But I don't know. This is the game line. You're making efforts to win e4, and then there's this tactical mishap that happens, right? h6, knight h3, bishop takes h3, pawn takes h3, e3. It's a big tactical opportunity for black. Just consider that. So I would say pawn takes b3, castles, bishop to e2, castles. But that was the issue. Bishop takes c3. What's your question, our paradox? Bishop takes c3 here. Stronger. Anyways, good idea advancing this d pawn. If you turn off self-analysis. Interesting. I don't know too much about this. Rook c8, bishop c4, e5, and basically, I think white's looking pretty solid here. But here's the key. Here's the key move, and I think that this. So in terms of things to take a look at, I just want to go through the game one more time, and then this will be the final time going through it. Smith-Morra, you're on kind of risky strategy, and then knight takes c3, bishop takes c3. is bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3 is an important move. Um, with b takes c3, you move the knight to g5, and the issue here is that this falls immediately to a tactic, right? So bishop takes c is, I guess, verging on forced, right? With bishop takes c3, you're okay because you can play knight to d2. But pawn takes is an inaccuracy that leads to this e4 and then knight to g4 and then h6. That's the opportunity as white, and then white goes back to knight to h3 is forced, and then bishop takes h3, pawn takes h3, e3. Your opponent didn't know that refutation, but the issue is you're playing in you're playing the Smith-Morra gambit where your margin for error is fairly low. Why can't you play queen e2? Good question. Bishop to g4, I think. I would assume. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, here's just black is positionally worse. I mean, this e4 pawn is getting held pretty well, and this knight's gonna have to move sooner or later once black castles. Um, I'm just reading through your comment, Willem. Uh, I'm not sure I understand your question, Willem, to be completely honest. Trade off pieces first with the passed pawn. I mean, if you're up material, then yes, but I don't know. I wouldn't say that that's a solid. I don't think a connected passed pawn means you should trade off material. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. And then you can move the dark squared bishop to give your knight a square. Um, yeah. I mean, that's the point of this. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, bishop takes c3 for sure. But here, e4, pawn takes, and then yeah, I think white's good. But bishop takes c3 is a better play here. B takes c3 leads to problems. B takes c3, e4, and then if knight to g5 like was played in this game, then the immediate response h6. Knight to g5 is not forced for white here. Queen e2 is a better alternative, as our paradox said. Yeah. So queen e2 is definitely an improvement on knight to g5 for sure. That's definitely true. But yeah. So black is missing that tactical opportunity. And now, I think this all sort of plays out in a relatively straightforward way, but I think your issue here is moving the king into king to d4. If you can prevent your pawn from getting approached by this king, you might as well do that. So here, king to d4, and you've gotten control of that square. Now you only need one piece beyond your king to reinforce this pawn. So I think that was actually a pretty big positional error. Bishop b3 is also a bit purposeless, but king to d4 is a big improvement. So yeah, sure, yeah. What's up, Bar Paradox? Rook takes d8. I'm not sure I follow. King to d4 and then rook takes d8. Sorry, our Paradox. I'm not sure I fully understand. But thank you. I mean, definitely keep asking the question. I'm very interested in the question. But yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. No problem, BFG. The Discord. I don't know if you have access to the Discord, but if you put it in the game submission section of the Discord, I'll get to it within a few days. But yeah, that's my BFG. Take a look at the game submission section of the Discord. Just in case if it's not super clear which one. Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks, BFG. I can confirm that for May 22nd at 9:35 p.m. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, no. It's in the list, BFG. It'll be on. And if you can't make the time, don't worry about it. You should be able to watch video on demand, but it's in for the evening show of May 22nd. Thanks for sending it. So yeah, so these are. I'll just go through one more time. Smith-Morra Gambit. The biggest part of this game, I think the thing that you can take away as a lasting, point of this analysis is here, after bishop takes c3, there's only one move that's been played 368 times. B takes has never been played. The correct move is bishop takes c3. So this should be a help. I'm hoping that this is an improvement to your kind of opening repertoire, because there's about a 1 point difference between this and the next one. Going through this game, this middle game all sort of makes sense. And then I just think there's the positional concept here. Definitely prioritize keeping the king out of your situation. If you can keep the king out of the situation, keep the king off of e5, then play king d4. And if you play king d4, then black can't really get in very effectively. You'll end up playing a move like c4 and probably getting the rook involved through rook to c1. That's how I would play this. So I would play king to d4, and then my plan for advancing this would be rook d1, rook to c1, c4. And that should work to break open that file. And once the file's in, then you can get your rook onto the black side of the board and really start to make some effective attacks on like the a6 and h6 pawns. After this, I think things kind of go towards black. Not really much to be said, and then white flags, but I think the situation's already sort of headed in black's direction. Black's probably going to win this b5 pawn, and then he's also got this very valuable passed and connected f pawn. So that's where I would say that's what I would say on this topic. Basically just those are the two pieces. If possible, spend a little bit of time straightening out your opening theory and make sure that B takes c3 is replaced by bishop takes c3. This happens a lot. It's like mainline Smith-Morra stuff. So definitely fix it to the game. The opening book line. And then the second one was just the conceptual improvement of don't let the king into your position if you don't have to. If you don't let the king into your position, you'll be able to maintain your endgame better. There was an interesting game, I think it might have been Raymond's, but there was an interesting game that I looked at, I think, this morning, where there was a trade of pawns in an endgame, but in the trade of pawns, one of the pieces got way better penetration of the opponent's position. So that's not just the material, but pay attention to where pieces get posted and how actively they can continue to attack your position. Keep them from being able to get into your position in an endgame. There's value in that. Your side tends to be where all of your pieces are to get taken, or all of your pawns are to get taken. So letting your opponent's pieces onto your side allows them easier access to take your pawns and get a material edge. Anyways, very interesting stuff, interesting situation. And Smith-Morra, okay, but take a look at bishop takes c3 as opposed to pawn takes c3. I assume you'll get that position a lot. It's mainline Smith-Morra, so straightening out and getting to the main line there, I think will be really helpful. I'm hoping that that's a helpful review. Anyways, on to the third game. Thank you for sending the game, Julio. Please keep sending them. We're looking at yours tomorrow morning too. But feel free to send as many as you'd like. Always happy to review them. Okay, here's Voxama's game. All right. So, this is interesting. E4 center counter, and then with the center counter, knight c6 is actually a playable move. So it doesn't have to be pawn takes d4. It can be knight to c6. Interesting. The center counter is a little bit... Yeah, of course, Kosu. If you send a game right now, Kosu, we can get to it on May 20th, or sorry, May 22nd at during the 9:35 p.m. Eastern stream. So feel free to send it. The game submission section of the Discord is probably the best place. So yeah, so knight c6 is the second most common, but knight c3 isn't even on the list. I think using that analysis criteria that we use, so basically we've come up with this analysis criteria for evaluating opening moves. Interesting. I didn't even know that was a thing, Willem, but I'll check it out. That sounds fun. I'd like that. Yeah. So knight c6 here. The Discord should be a link on the stream, Kosu. But yeah, knight c6 versus interesting. Yeah, endgame tactics are cool, Willem. So I'll check that out. I like that idea. But yeah, so knight c6. This basically this idea here is fine, but the move that needs to be replaced is knight to c3. So it fails on the criteria of it versus the second best move is more than a 1 point difference, right? So when white plays knight to c3, the first and second best lines there are more than more than 1 point apart. So here, if white plays d takes e5, white is up by 1 pawn. And then if knight to c3 plays, it's 1.65 pawns down. So there's a swing of 1.6 pawns there, which is too much. And then the other piece of criteria that we look at is, in past games in the opening book, what percentage of the games have the opening move that you've suggested? And if it's less than 1%, it probably shouldn't be played. So here, knight to c3 is not even on the list of potential opening moves. There's about 15,000 games here, and none of them are knight c3. So I think you can, I know that you're playing black here, but you should avoid knight to c3 because, if you were white, you would want to avoid knight to c3 based on our opening screening criteria. As black, there's a few options. Knight takes is not one of them, but this is a weird enough situation that knight takes d4 is fine. I don't think knight takes d4, e takes d4. I don't think those are tremendously different, but you do definitely want to win the pawn with one of those. Bishop c4, bishop c5, sure. This is pretty unusual. So yeah, here knight's placed f3. So I think this is mostly about tactics. Here, knight takes f3 allows you to take the knight with check. You follow up with bishop takes e3, and overall black will end up in a really good situation after this. You're up a pawn, so you can you can basically comfortably trade off pieces. So I would just go ahead and trade off pieces to play knight takes f3, queen takes f3, bishop takes e3, queen takes e3. And overall here black's just better. White has slightly better development, but black is up a full pawn, and that's that's strong. So yeah, errors here. Knight takes e5 is a little silly. Or basically, I would say here, b6 doesn't really advance your position. Play knight takes f3 and bishop takes e3. You're up a pawn, so you can safely trade off. And then here, queen to d5 threatens this rook, and then black basically has to play rook to b8. And then on knight takes f7, queen takes f7, queen to e5. So this position's getting very tactical. This basically has gotten into a situation where you're, really within kind of a tactical range. We can play through it, but my main piece of advice on this kind of stuff is, I can't add that much value on it. I think basically, analysis of tactics is done better than any human by the computer. So, I would just go with kind of what the computer says on that one. Big tactical, what I'm going to do is the best that any human can do there is just sort of read out the computer's outpost on the read out like the computer's output on the engine. So, I think that basically here, once it turns into a tactical game, it's not super good to analyze. It's very volatile. We can look at this game. These spikes here are big. So I guess my claim here basically is, what you should do is study tactics. People who are under 2,000 will benefit the most if they allocate most of their study time to tactics. I strongly believe that. The percentage of games at your level that are determined by tactical considerations is probably going to be about 100%. So, I think learning tactics, using Tactics Trainer, Willem just told me about a new Tactics Trainer, but the ones that I'm used to are, Chess.com Puzzle Battle, Chess.com Puzzle Rush, Lead Chess has a Tactics Trainer, whatever works for you. But just basically put in an hour a day on the Tactics Trainer, and, that will be very helpful for you. In terms of opening ideas here, the biggest takeaways. So the biggest takeaway in this game, I think, other than tactical games, you'll perform better in tactical games with better tactical study. Is if you have the opportunity to trade off when you're up material, you should trade off. So if you're up material, you should trade off your pieces. If you're down material, you should want to trade off pawns, because giving your opponent fewer pawns gives him fewer options to promote. So yeah, here I would just say, with this knight on f3, you should play knight takes f3. b6 is not super helpful. There's some wild tactical play, super volatile. But really here, I think it's less about the game and more about kind of I think improving is more about kind of what you can do going forward to improve your situation. So that's my argument there. I think basically what you should do is go to a tactics trainer and train on it for like an hour to two a day for like a month. And I think you'll be seeing a lot more things and catching a lot more opportunities. Basically in a grandmaster level game, these lines are super solid. You want to ideally make your lines look like that. If they're volatile like this, that can be problematic. Anyways, thank you very much for sending the game, Vox. Please send as many more in as you like. Your opponent took you out of the game, or basically took you out of the opening theory almost immediately, and then it just became a very tactical game. And I can say play better tactics or look at this cool tactic or whatever. There's one cool tactic in here we can take a look at. It's here. Queen to d5 forces rook to b8, so this threatens the rook, right? And nothing can block it. So bishop to b7 can't block it because you just take it. Queen to c6 would run into knight c6. So rook to b8 is forced. Then once rook to b8 has been played, you can play knight takes f7. And on knight takes f7, on queen takes f7, you play queen e5 and threaten the king and the rook. That's a cool tactic. That's interesting that white has that, and it was definitely part of this game. But the thing about it is I'm sort of just reading engine output to determine the best ideas there. It's not really that strong, to be honest. It's basically just there's not much humans can do relative to the computer at that point. What you would do is that I would recommend is basically try to make sure that this basically try to make sure that your tactics are as strong as possible, because sub 1000 level almost 100% of games are determined by tactics. Anyways, very interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it, Vox, and please keep sending me in as many as you'd like. I'm always interested to see them. Thank you. But yeah, tactics training, an hour a day on whatever tactics training you like. There's in the chess resources section of the Discord, there's a good list of tactics trainers, and whichever one you have access to and whichever one you like works just fine. Here's JD Mintz's game. We'll take it from his perspective. JD Mintz plays the Slav. Cool. Knight f3, knight f6. And here, this is called the note boom variation. We were actually looking at this yesterday, right? Or I guess maybe note boom variation comes in after e6. But this is, hey, yeah, no, thank you very much for being here, JD Mintz. I really appreciate it. But yeah, so d takes c4 is a d takes c4 neutralizes white or black's center. It's fine in a lot of cases, and it can start play with b5, b4. But in general, I'm sort of slow to accept the gambit. I think that basically keeping, you're trading your d pawn for your c pawn here. When I play the Queen's Gambit as black, I try to basically play moves like bishop f5, bishop g4, and e6. You can also just transpose it into the semi-Slav with e6. This can work out well, but I'm usually not, d takes c4 is going to be a relatively common move here. It's the second most common. So first most common here is e6. D takes c4 is the second most common. I'm sure d takes c4 is fine. It's going to start a lot of play with b5, b4, and you'll get to exert pressure on the queen side. But I'm just not so. Anyways, it's a fine opening. I should be less nitpicky. Like, I don't like the idea of trading the d pawn on the fourth for the c pawn on the fourth, but it's fine. It works out fine. So here you've got basically the semi-Slav defensive structure without d5. You play bishop b4, castles, queen e2, and you guys are actually following the engine or the opening book line pretty much perfectly, which is good. Yeah. So you actually no. I mean, I don't know. It's the second most popular move, and there's 13,000 master games, so I'm sure I'm alone in that thing. But I would rather have the semi-Slav structure with the slow bishop on bishop c8 than I would, sacrifice my d5 pawn for my opponent's c4 pawn. Overall, it's just it's a stronger pawn. But either way, that's a taste thing. Like, that grandmasters have played d takes c4. There's nothing wrong with d takes c4. Just I like the semi-Slav structure. I feel like the semi-Slav structure is just like extremely solid, hard for white to really break through. That's why it's appealing to me. But yeah, so this basically this thing is pretty good for white versus black. Basically white has or black has equalized here. You're still in mainline theory, though. That's what's kind of crazy about this. I mean, you're 15 moves into it, and you're still playing, something with 6 games out of the opening book. So overall, great job. It's always hard to know theory, and if you play theory, you're going to ensure, equality or best chance at equality. So actually, great opening knowledge there. You're playing book moves till move 15 or so. I mean, that's good. Book moves tend to objectively be the strongest. Okay, b3 is a little quiet. I think b3 is probably the last. a5, okay, sure. Bishop takes d5 is where you diverge from opening book. Well, I mean, most of the Sicilian lines are determined. The specific Sicilian lines are paradox or I mean, I play the open Sicilian with an early g3, but there's a lot of variations in the Sicilian. Usually, it's black that determines the variation, like Khan versus Taimanov versus Dragon. Like, usually it's black who actually gets to make that choice. Interesting. I don't know. I don't play daily games. I like the 1-minute games. 1-minute games, just, I don't know. You can play. I'm not a. Anyways, I don't play daily. All those seem. That all seems sort of sketchy. It's like correspondence chess now. Like, who really plays that? Anyways, black's black's opportunities here. You're in book. In book is rook ac1. Here, bishop takes d5 is not. Basically, I think bishop takes c5, d5 is not a great move. You're trading off white's trading off the better squared white bishop for a posted knight. That's bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5, b3. I don't know. This is all kind of this is about equals. I mean, you've played into an equal-ish line, right? Where does the eval shift though? Something happens here that I wasn't looking at. Yeah, rook c2 is pretty good. Yeah, so white makes a mistake here. I think the conceptual mistake was bishop takes d5. This knight is not, this knight versus this bishop, I'm not sure the difference in strength between those two is worth white's move here. This pawn takes c5 solves a lot of problems for black. Getting this open file for the rook really increases black's mobility. So that's something to consider. b3, rook ac8, bishop takes, queen b2. And then rook c2, take the 7th here. That makes sense. Queen a3, rook takes. Black's in a good position. I mean, black has the superior minor pieces. He has complete control of the only file in which the rooks can get into the black position. I really like black's position here, actually. It's not a material advantage, but it's just the black controls a lot more of the ground here. So yeah, overall good idea for black to play moves like rook to c2. Strong. Yeah, here I think black's just fine. Yeah, rook knight e1 is a challenge, but yeah, black's control of the c file here and the 7th rank is just really, really valuable. So for this, I think that pawn takes d5, or bishop takes d5, c takes d5 was a mistake for white. And then not challenging the rook on the c file was a mistake for white as well. By the time this happens, black's got a huge, black's got a good advantage. So let's take a look. Knight d2, sure. Rook c6. This all looks fine so far. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, so you lost a piece, but that's not really a yeah, I see what happened. All right, so there's a big tactic here. That happens. Hey, what's up, Tarash? Welcome to the stream. But yeah, so the big mistake here was in I'm good. Yeah, it's going. But yeah, so the big error here was on knight f4, you restricted your king's mobility. Yeah, so this is about a 6-point swing on bishop h7. That's a lot. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a tactic, JD Mintz. I mean, that's a tough situation, but these two-move tactics can really be decisive. King h7 here, among other things, saves your position. As does king h7 here. You can still play king h7, and I think black should be fine. Yeah, I mean, this probably isn't great, but like, black is fine. So bishop h7 was the error. King h7 solves a lot of your problems. So that's that, I think. Yeah, it's just a two-move tactic determining the game. The percentage of games at class level that are determined by two-move tactics is over 50%. I mean, it's some very large number. It's nothing to worry about. It just means that you're not quite means you have an opportunity to improve tactically, and that will show show good returns. Yeah, no, I mean it's fine. It's fine, JD Mintz. Yeah, no, no. I mean, the thing is, you can have great positional understanding, you can do great opening prep, but like at the end of the day, tactics just sort of trump everything. It's not a uh, it's not really fair, right? Because you've played 40 moves correctly, so to like lose on a 2-move tactic is a bummer. Um, I think you played a lot of conceptually good things here. I think, yeah, no worries, Tarash. No, never a problem. Um, but yeah, so C takes d5. I think C takes d5 was a fundamental error. I think trading that bishop for that knight was never worth it under any scenario. But then the way that White lets you get into that file is really an error, a larger error. Um, that happens. Um, it happens. If that opening never won, no one would play it, Tarash. So it's however, whatever happened, I'm sure stronger players than either of us have lost to it. Um, Interesting. The end. Yeah. So let's take a look. So at this point, I really like Black's position. I think White made an error in allowing Black to get such good control of the C file. B6, and now I don't know. I don't know if Knight to D3 was the best idea. I don't know, or I don't know if Knight to D3 was the best idea, but it worked, so good enough. And then this is just a 2-move tactic that swings the game by about 6 points. That's tough. I mean, tactics is we all need to study more tactics. But that's a big swing in this game. Then things get interesting again, right? Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Black Summers. I appreciate it. So anyways, this game is complicated. Here they're evaluating it as only 0.11 better for White. That's actually pretty impressive, right? Like, I would figure that this pawn is strong, right? This is a connected passed pawn, but I would still figure that this knight would be worth more than the 2 pawns that Black's gonna get, because Black's gonna get Black's gonna be 2 pawns up. I mean, basically from this situation, none of Black's pawns are vulnerable. But White's pawns are vulnerable. So Black will play something like rook to a2 and threaten g2, and Black's going to end up having the tempo to win one of these 3 pawns. And after that happens, Black will be 2 pawns up. So here it is, Black's 2 pawns up, and it's back to equal, and even a little better for Black. So tough situation actually. In terms of plans for Black, like which pawn should be the one that queens? That's probably the hardest question here. I think the strategy for Black, as opposed to pushing the pawn, should be to win another pawn. If Black can get 3 pawns up, so now I think that now I definitely believe that Black is equal here. 3 pawns uncompensated should be enough to make up for this knight. Sorry, let's go back to this. So now in this situation, Black has 3 pawns to the knight, and that's probably enough to make it equal. You do have to be careful with mating threats, though. These things can get actually really dangerous. So f6 is forced, right? I mean, g6 doesn't work. f6 is a forced move. But you're still 3 pawns up. And here, I'm sort of curious about rook g4. Yeah, rook g4 is interesting, because I think if you just trade off the rooks here, so rook takes, pawn takes, then what happens? It's tricky. Yeah, these endgames are really difficult. Pawn versus 3 knights. Yeah, Black just wins. Nice. Good job. So yeah, really interesting game, JD Mints. Good job winning that 3 pawns versus knight endgame. That one's not clear to me. Those are like endgame study quality positions. If we go back to like this situation where it's the rooks have just come off, this is like an endgame study. This is something that an engine would take a long time to solve. So I can't, I it's great that you won it, but I can't give a decisive assessment on this. Like it's a difficult thing. It would take like an hour and an engine to like go through and learn the or like put up a table base or whatever and get the full eval for it. So yeah, so this is an interesting and difficult situation. Good job winning it as black. I do think you have winning chances, but it's a tough one. I don't have much in the way. Maybe I should put in a rook or a knight and pawn endgame, right? Like I'll put that into the schedule for some point, because I don't want to pretend like this is like, to look at this position is the type of thing that would take a grandmaster a long time, and it would take me a very long time. And with an engine analysis, you could probably come to a solution as to like best course of action. But this is very advanced material. So I'd love to do like a knight and pawn endgame session, but this even as a national master, this is beyond me. I could look and I could say, all right, you probably should play e5 because like that pushes the knight back with the tempo. Then you should probably get the king in, maybe through h4. But h4 once these pawns are on e5 and d5. Like I could come up with strategies here, but I don't want to misrepresent. This is stronger stuff. This is higher level stuff than I'm at, to be able to analyze this super quickly. But yeah, I do think it's worth doing a knight and 3-pawn endgame. And good job on you for winning this. Yeah, no, totally. It is really complicated. They have like very sophisticated endgame analysis now. Endgames are simple enough that computers can often play them to the end. So that's definitely something to think about. But in any case, you won as black, so that that was good. But if you were to look at the position immediately after the rooks trade off, this is like an endgame study, like a difficult endgame study to figure out exactly what optimal play here is and what optimal strategies are. Anyways, going back to the game, this this makes sense. D takes c4 is playable. You have the choice between playing d takes c4 or turning it into the semi-Slav. It's up to you. This makes sense. And then bishop takes d5, c takes d5. This looks pretty good for black generally. Or once the c file gets open, black can control it pretty easily, and by this point, black's in good shape. All this play makes sense. I guess I would say hold on to the C file for as long as you can, or hold on to the 7th rank for as long as you can. Here they're sort of nitpicking on rook to C2 versus knight to A6. Rook to C2 is better. It helps you regain the 2nd rank with a threat on the knight, so you can hold this bishop here for at least another couple moves. White will have to play a response move, and then you'll play like knight A6 then. So this transposition is a little bit better for you. Rook to A2 is an improvement because it helps you take the 2nd rank with a threat, and then you can develop. But if you can get the threat in for free, which you can here, this is better for black. Yeah, rook threatens e2. Cool. All this makes sense. And then just bishop h7. So really the biggest error of this game was bishop to h7. In terms of the way the endgame was playing, this is complicated. I don't know exactly how this is supposed to go. I don't think your chances get any worse by trading off the rook. Like, I think trading off the rook... The thing about trading off the rook, right, is that you dramatically decrease your losing chances. If you force the rook off, you're not going to lose this game anymore. There's some value in that. You probably wouldn't lose it rook. I don't even know if rook and knight versus rook is a forced win. I have a feeling that it isn't. I have a feeling that rook, if the game came off to rook and knight versus rook, I think that you would be able to draw that still. But I'm not 100% sure on that. But what you did as black made a lot of sense. So just front to back one more time. Um, this all makes sense. Uh, Bishop takes d5. You know, you basically play 15 moves of theory, so great job to both of you guys for playing mainline theory for that long. It's hard to play mainline theory for that long. But perfectly executed theory for 15 moves. And then queen to b2 is an error. And then you can take the c file. Yeah, exactly. No, I think trading off rooks, more than anything, it dramatically decreases your losing chances. It draws your losing chances to 0. So there's some value in that, and I don't think it gets any more drawish with the rooks off. Like, I think it's equally drawish whether the rooks are there or not, but it does decrease your losing chances as black. So this all made sense. This was good. And then rook to c1, interesting. Let's take a look at rook to c1 tactic. Then it's rook a1, rook d1, rook takes, and then rook to c3 probably. Yeah, threatening this b3 pawn. So that's an improvement. So yeah, the real improvements this game, the most obvious one is just the tactical oversight that was almost decisive. This bishop to h7. That's a mistake. That happens to everyone, and with tactics training, I think you can iron out most of those. You won't get tunnel visioned on the bishop, and you can play king h7 and hold on to the bishop that way. You won't have that problem with enough tactical study. Here, there's a little bit of a... here's the only other place where I think you have a good opportunity to improve, which is, rook d1 here, and trading off the rooks lets you get a free threat on... lets you get a free threat on b3. It basically wins you b3, actually. Because here, rook a d1, rook takes, rook to c3, and white has no way of effectively defending this. The other way, rook takes rook, and then king to f1 is forced, but then that's losing because bishop to d3 and knocking the bishop off of, or knocking the king off of the defense of the e1 knight. So overall, there were a few other tactics on this. I think your fundamental concept was right. I think you did a really good thing positionally here, where you got these rooks doubled on the c file. This provides you great positional compensation. And the real question is, how do you turn this very good position into a tactical victory? And you can. Here it's rook to e1 for those tactics that we went through really quickly right now. And then the second opportunity comes with rook to c2 here, where you get this free attack on this e2, and then free attack on e2, and then you get the rook back to c2, and then maneuver your knight up tactically there. This would be an example of a tactic leading to a positional edge. So rook to c2 here. So what was played was knight to a6, which is not bad, but not as effective as rook to c2, which white will have to respond to with king f1, and then you can get both, basically in the same tempo, you get knight a6 and rook to c2 played. So that's just like a straightforward improvement in tempo. You just pick up time by launching this threat that white needs to respond to. Then you can play what you wanted to play anyways. Yeah, no, for sure. I think, tactical and positional chess is where it's at, in my opinion. Like, I think the value, I place tactics above all other things up until you're about 2000. If you can just play a clean tactical game and catch when your opponent hangs things to like 2 or 3 move tactics, that's going to get you really far. Like, it's really very, someone gave the analysis of what Stockfish is rated with only like 3 moves of vision. So basically like a perfect 3-move forward-looking thing, and it's already like 16 or 1700. Like, basically just seeing no more than like 2 moves ahead gets you to 1600 with optimal play. It's some type of very high level. So the importance of 1, 2, and 3 move tactics is extremely large. So many games are decided by tactics at club level. Positional play is also very important, but I think that's stylistically the best way to go. I think your goal in chess should basically be, prepare your openings well enough that you get to a game, and then just have way better fundamental positional and tactical play than your opponent. That's my argument on that. I think that's the best way to play as that's a good way to improve. Um, so yeah, a really interesting situation. I think the strategy was good. The positional thinking was good. Great job taking the open file and winning the open file as black, putting your rook on the second rank. All good. And it's just about coming up with the next tactics that come up to try to convert that into a win. The two that were the most clear there were the one that wins b3 and the one that saves a big tempo by getting your rook to c2 and then getting your rook to knight a6. But yeah, overall, really interesting stuff, JD Mintz. Good job winning this 3 pawns versus knight endgame. I don't know how, I don't know what to do here exactly, but what you did worked. So interesting, very interesting stuff. Could be useful if you have an engine and a lot of time. Definitely look through it. Yeah, good stuff. Good win for black. Interesting position, and great job. And another thing, you guys played excellent. Excellent opening theory. You guys were in book for the first 16 moves. That's pretty difficult to do. That's pretty impressive. So, good work on that. Definitely. Definitely strong. Playing 16 moves of theory is not an easy thing to do. Okay. Here's X Paradox's game. X Paradox plays the Scandinavian. His opponent plays e5. And here we've had a few discussions on this, but basically d5 against e5, the correct move is c5. And the reason why it's c5 is basically because c5 turns this into an unfavorable Sicilian for white. White's best chance here to try to hold on to this pawn is to turn it into the French. Sorry, did I say Sicilian? This transpose. Yeah, thank you, JD Mintz. Really interesting game. I think you played great positionally and you played great opening book. But yeah, tactics are the biggest determinant. And I think if you put the time in tactically, you'll really see good returns on that. But thanks for sending it, JD Mintz. Always very happy to look it over. Really appreciate you sending it over. So yeah, in this situation, White's best opportunity turning this into the French with d4, e5. Black's opportunity here is, basically disrupting that French. So if c3 gets played, you can play d4 and keep this pawn pretty much isolated from the d pawn for the rest of the game. If d4 is played, you just take d4. And you've basically it's just like a French, except you've equalized because you traded the c pawn for the d pawn. This gets back to that French structure that I'm always talking about, how French is basically dominated by white pawns on d4 and e5, and if white can maintain them, that's good for white, and if black is able to disrupt them, then that equalizes for black. This is an example of that. So the reason why e5 is an incorrect play against the Scandinavian is because c5 will transpose into an unfavorable French structure for black. Cool. Going on in this game, f6. Yeah, I don't think f6 is correct. I think that I understand f6 because you're trying to like get rid of this e pawn as soon as possible, right? But I think that yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, right, our paradox. And I think that's right. I think that's better. So Scandinavian e5, I think c5 is the play. So yeah, so that's the main takeaway. I think that's just objectively better. In this situation, I think you're fine. But I understand f6. F6 is like basically get the pawn eliminated as soon as possible. I understand it. Cool. This looks good for black. Nice. Yeah, great. All right, awesome endgame play, our paradox. Yeah, good job. Cool. Good one. Good game, our paradox. Good win. Nice. So c5 I think is an improvement on f6. This all sort of makes sense. We're not in opening theory anymore, but at least basically you're developing, and that's good. Um, and then, sure. This is an error. This is a good tactic for black. And yeah, there's a tactical improvement here. Knight to d3 threatens this rook, forces this rook over to defend this bishop. So here, say rook takes f8, and then rook takes f8, and then rook to b1, knight takes, rook takes. But you're just up 2 pawns here. So I guess the decisive part came earlier than this. Okay, so here's the first pawn you win. That's important. The material's back to equal. And then you win this pawn on c3. That's really where this game was decided. White plays c3, which is an error. The correct move here is rook to a2, I think. Or, no, sorry. The correct move here, I think, is c4. c4 is the most straightforward way to improve this position. Here on knight to e2, white doesn't lose any material. So c3 is an error because white loses a pawn relative to c4. And then you win the f2 pawn. Awesome. This was another error. Here, king g1 works fine. But rook to e1 loses another pawn. And then you're good. So yeah, pretty simple game, honestly. Really interesting. Thank you for sending it, our Paradox. The biggest improvements that I'd give you is c5, which you've already switched in your game. So that's probably the biggest change I'd make to this game. Otherwise, from a tactical perspective, this all sort of made sense. Strong game. You end up winning 2 pawns. And yeah, good stuff. Knight threatens on e7, takes c3, cool. Yeah, I like this. This looks good. This looks like a really natural way to play as black, and you got a pretty solid win out of it. Should be pretty smooth sailing. Let's take a look at what the errors were for white here. There's basically 2. So I think up to this point you guys have played relatively equally. There aren't any huge errors for white. But then white starts making some tactical mistakes. The first is c3, and you can play knight takes c3. And then the second is rook to e1, and you can play knight takes f2. But basically, you guys are strong enough that a 2-pawn loss for no compensation leads to a loss, which it should, but it does. You successfully convert a 2-pawn advantage. There's probably a slightly more efficient way to play this endgame, but this worked just fine. So, all right, that worked. Cool. Yeah, thanks for sending the game, Paradox. Really strong game. I think in terms of accuracy, yeah, your accuracy is pretty high on this one, for sure. So, yeah, I don't think there was anything too crazy that happened there. I'd play c5 instead of f6, and then yeah, good tactics, winning those 2 pawns, and then you play pretty well. Rook f2 hangs a pawn. So this is the other. There are only 2 errors in this game. One was that c5. One was that c5 versus f6, and then here's the other one. So bishop takes e5. Yeah, thank you very much for sending the game in, our Paradox. No, I really appreciate it. So bishop to c1 here, and you're forking 2 pieces at once, right? Like this, this double attack should win for white. So yeah, that was determining that was an error. This is an overextension. These types of things happen. But yeah, rook to f2 is an error. You're getting threatened and you respond with the threat, but then white can white can evade your threat, and now you're getting threatened in 2 places at once. So this was the error in this game. Happens. Yeah, and then bishop takes e5. But I don't know. Very interesting point. Very interesting point. Our paradox. So the improvements are, this one, which is an opening theory knowledge thing. Turn this into a bad French for white is the better strategic play. These tactics I'm going through pretty quickly, but they look relatively intuitive. I don't think there's much there. And then white makes these two pawn errors, and then you decide to get a little bit too creative. You're getting threatened by a piece here, and then you play your rook to another threatenable square. On rook f2, bishop can play to c1, and you're getting double threatened. So that's a tactical blunder. Thankfully, your opponent didn't see it, and you convert the win. So yeah, nicely done. Nicely done, our paradox. A good game, strong game, and those are the two, the two junctures where there were improvements. Your opponent didn't capitalize on the missed piece, or on the tactical piece, and then from a fundamental perspective, the best way to deal with e4, d5, e5 is by playing c5 and then giving your opponent a bad French structure as black. But yeah, thanks very much for sending it in, our paradox. I really appreciate it. Please keep sending in your games, interesting. It's always just interesting to see what can happen, but that double attack is something to be aware of, and again, it's just how it is. I mean, it's tactical study. It's just it's really about tactics. 50% plus games at club level are determined by tactics. So tactical study, with that being the determining factor so frequently, tactical study should be your route forward. Okay, e4, knight c6. I think this is called the Nimzowitsch, right? Yeah, Nimzowitsch. It's a weird opening. Played less than 1% of the time for sure. I don't see it very frequently at all as white. And I'm an e4 player, and I rarely see it. Knight c3, e5. E5 looks pretty questionable. E5 might be... Let's see if that fits our description. Not quite. It's played like 3 or 4% of the time. My threshold was 1% of the time. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's interesting. So Nimzowitsch, I mean, Nimzowitsch can transpose into the Italian game sometimes. But yeah, with d4, it's a weird opening. I don't know it super well. I'd probably try to transpose it into the Italian game, to be honest. If I see knight e4, knight c6, I'd probably play knight f3. Actually, that's an extremely good point, Tarash. By the way, that is a completely true concept. You're saying you want to improve so that you can reach the level where you actually have an interesting game as opposed to offbeat lines. Yeah, that's a really legitimate point. I never see the weird stuff that C players play against each other. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Victor. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. But yeah, you're making a really good point, Tarash. And it's true. It's true. If you get to expert level, people totally stop playing weird gambits against you. Like the last time I haven't seen the Smith-Morra gambit in an over-the-board game in years and years, like if ever. It's been so long since I've seen this stuff, or the Stafford gambit. Like, I never came up with a better solution than to sidestep it. But the most impressive thing is people just stop playing it against you. You don't really even have to learn it. You just need to sidestep it well enough that you're not like way worse off. And then people who play those openings but are low-rated players it tends to be the strongest part of their game. So you can just transpose it into, if you can find any way out of that gambit stuff. Yeah, but I don't even play knight takes e5 against I don't play e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight takes e5. I play the two knights there. So there, I don't think you would have a chance to play it against me. I just sidestep. That's specific because there are openings less surprising than that. But that's the thing. But I guess the thing about it is I don't know. I don't have any. The thing is, I don't have any opinion on any streamers. I don't care. I'm trying to do my own thing. Streamers are not who I care about. The people I care about are people who are selling lessons. That's who I find that's who I think is doing something a little bit not okay right now. But if at the same time, if people want to pay for lessons, that's fine. It's just it just seems like they're selling something that should be free at this point. Um, but anyways, I don't have any opinion on any streamers. Um, uh, I wish they. I guess my opinion on other streamers is I wish they would go into instructional material. I think they would do well if they went into instructional material, and I think the world would be better if streamers gave more free instructional material. That's my opinion on streamers. Other than that, everyone's cool by me. I have no opinions. Um, but yeah, the thing about it is people stop playing offbeat stuff against you. If you can sidestep it into equality, that's usually good enough. Um, anyways, so e5, knight f3, e takes, knight takes, and white's fine. Queen e7, bishop b5, queen c5. No problems in this situation. So let's look at Matt Yop's game. Nimzowitsch game, don't know anything about it. Knight f3, now it's the Scotch game. Queen e7, knight takes c6 is probably best. Um, well, that's funny. I don't know. People don't try those gambits against me. Maybe they should. I don't know. But if you sidestep, then hmm, interesting interesting situation. It's different than mine. Um, Queen e7, knight takes e6 is book, but honestly here you're just playing the Scotch. Knight takes c6 is probably right. Bishop d3. This game got unusual. Nimzowitsch, knight c3, e5. You know what though? Here we go. We've actually looked at this before. This is interesting. This is the Halloween Gambit thing that we were talking about, right? Where basically you've sacrificed the d pawn to get this structure. This structure is almost universally good. This is the same structure from the Halloween Gambit, except in the Halloween Gambit you sacrifice the knight on e5 to get this. But basically these two knights aligned like this and a center structure attacking them is good for white. So that's the improvement that I would make here at Matyop. I would just take this structure, pawn takes e5, f4, and get yeah, knight to c6. Yeah, I think knight to g6. But either way, you get a very solid minor pieces relative to black here and a spatial advantage. So that's the improvement that I would make. I would just play pawn takes e5 and don't be afraid to play f4, challenging the knights when they're like this. This is an awkward position for the knights to be in, and if you do that, then you can basically improve with you can basically improve. So f4 and the knight has to go somewhere. So e5 instead, knight f3. You've transposed it into the Scotch. Here you can just sort of develop in a normal way. The Scotch is usually pretty good for white. Engine is suggesting bishop to e2, bishop to g5. Whatever. Bishop to b5 is fine too. You just have kind of smooth sailing, good Scotch position for white. Bishop takes, and this is I think black's kind of being a little bit too fancy here. And yeah, nice, good tactic. Cool. So this game got super complicated, Matyop. It basically became a tactical position pretty early. Here I'd play d takes e5, knight takes f4, and you're running 2 pawns against this knight structure. This knight structure is something that is weak for black. When you can start threatening this type of knight structure, these knight on e5 and knight on f6 as white, that tends to be good for you. The situation that I think of the most when I look at this is the Halloween Gambit. So like Halloween Gambit chess is just it'll have a picture of this pawn structure. But basically, if you look at this pawn structure after knight takes e5, after knight takes e5, you play f4. So basically, in this situation, you've reached the Halloween Gambit post position, except you've sacrificed the d pawn as opposed to the knight on f3, which is a much cheaper way to achieve that. So yeah, anyways, this ends up being great for white. F4, knight g6, e5. Now white's got basically all the game here. It just looks good for white. Knight takes, queen e7. But white's still just, after this, all these tactics, white's up 5 points, and it never gets closer again. So yeah, nice. Good tactics. Good way to close this out. Very strong. Uh, up to you. But yeah, thanks, Tarash. Stick with those tactics. I think the tactics will elevate you to the level where you won't have those problems anymore. But it's up to you. Thanks for joining us on the stream. Keep joining it, even if you quit chess. Join us on the stream, okay, Tarash? It's nice. It's always good to have you here. You raised some interesting questions. E5, but the move here was pawn takes e5. Knight takes e5, f4, and then you've got a Halloween Gambit, except it's the d pawn instead of the knight. So way cheaper than your average Halloween Gambit. And then you play e5, and then knight back to g8. Black didn't really give you much in the way of opportunities to make errors, though. Turns into the Scotch, you've got good development. And then queen to a5 doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't understand why queen to a5 was made. After queen to a5, just smooth sailing for white. Queen takes c6, c3 was also very confusing. So, overall, Matt Yup, thank you very much for sending the game. I think your opponent made some pretty serious tactical errors, and overall, interesting situation. But the improvement that I would make here, pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, f4. This was the correct way to play that opening. Nimzowitsch with e5 is very strange. Nimzowitsch in general is very strange. I see that probably less than 1% of the time. But overall, yeah, I really appreciate you sending the game. And this gives an interesting demonstration of an offbeat opening and kind of how to refute it. E5 here, f4. This structure, basically this kind of demonstrates the importance of strong structures. If you know this structure and you know that white often pays a knight to get to this, then on knight takes e5, you play f4, and you've reached this position with a much simpler, with a much simpler opportunity. Anyways, a very interesting game, Matt Yup. Thank you very much for sending it. I really appreciate it. And yeah, please keep sending them. This gave us an opportunity to take a look at some very interesting theory. And yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for sending it in. And please keep sending them. Nimzowitsch opening. Not one that I know super well, but an interesting one to go through. But I would extrapolate it out into this Halloween Gambit structure. What happened in this game, because that was very interesting. Anyways, let's see. All right. Anyways, thank you very much for sending that game in, Matt Yup. And yeah, I think we can kind of wrap up. That was the last game that I had for the night. But thank you guys very much for taking the time with this. I really appreciate it. Yeah, good stuff. Hey, Victor, thank you very much for the follow. I really appreciate it. This is a free lesson stream. Um, Unfortunately, I only speak English well. But yeah, welcome. If you want to take a look, here I'll send you the link for the Discord, Victor, if you'd like. And you can send a game or you can make a recommendation for stream. Um, yeah, Discord. I apologize, Victor, but I don't understand. Um, uh, yeah, no, but thank you very much for reaching out, and yeah, no, thanks for sending that. I really appreciate you reaching out, Victor. I appreciate the follow, and if you'd like to send a game, I can analyze it, but unfortunately, it would have to be in English. Thank you very much. Uh, I'll. This is chess. Thanks very much for being here. Don't Yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna wrap up the stream. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later. See you later. Bye. Oh, next stream, by the way, is at 10 a.m. Eastern. All right. Good work, Jen. Thanks for that. Jen's the best. Um, Anyways, guys, next stream is at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, and then the schedule change takes place on Saturday. But thank you all very much for being here, and please, yeah, please let me know. If you have any more games or you'd like anything else reviewed, please just add it to the game submission channel. Thanks a lot. Have a good one, and I'll see you later. Thanks. Bye.